Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
We're back.
We're back. Back to where? We don't know, but we're back. Well, I thought that in this episode, we would just jump in. And, one of the things that I find, really interesting about commercial real estate is that, no two deals are the same. There are so many differentiating factors from one transaction to another. And it's not just the people involved, but it is the actual property itself, and oftentimes we have to touch so many institutions within a city. It's the zoning, it's our local DERM, when it comes to environmental issues. It's dealing with, whether you want to upzone an area in order for it to make sense, for the numbers to make sense. And so, I'm sure that throughout the years you have, some stories. So I thought we would delve into, just a couple of examples of transactions that we've been involved with where, there's always a little bit of a challenge. There's always some curveball that is thrown either at the beginning, the middle, or the end. We always have to find a way to overcome those challenges, to connect people to the right people, and to be self-aware enough to know that we may not know everything, but we have the resources to be able to find the right answer, and
or the people who have the right answer,
or the people who have the right answer.
That's true. That's true. And the importance of making sure that your team is informed, right? Whoever it is, your title company, your attorneys, and you can have several attorneys. To your point, you can have a contractual attorney, a zoning attorney, etc. So
true.
Yeah, I'm working on a deal. I don't even have to go that far back. I'm working on a lease now, and luckily we had this really great attorney because we're dealing with a client from out of town that's moving, like so many people here. They're gonna expand their operation from the Northeast. They're moving, not moving, but they're opening a branch down here. And we were doing background work on zoning and some of the changes because we are going to need to do a change of use, no big deal. And in doing the research, she found that there was this ordinance in the city of Miami that was getting ready to go ahead of second reading. And the second reading was going to be around the time that we had signed a lease, or we're getting ready to sign the lease. And she said, wait a minute, this ordinance is going to affect parking, like the current parking in the area that you're looking, which was in Wynwood, is going to be affected for outdoor dining in this area. And so anyway, we spoke to the listing agents. They had no idea. She spoke to the business improvement the business improvement district. They weren't aware of it. So then she reached out to people in the commission and said, hey, did you realize that if you pass this new ordinance, it's going to affect everybody who currently has outdoor dining in the areas that have the most outdoor dining in the city, which included, obviously Coconut Grove and Wynwood stuff that we're trying to promote more of. So luckily that came out before second reading, and they were able to tweak it to still pass their ordinance, but not with this issue that was going to affect not only every existing person who had outdoor dining, but it was also going to affect the future of people wanting to open more outdoor dining. And basically it's what, it's kind of what the customer wants. They want the outdoor experience. They're in Miami.
But that's incredibly fortuitous, because think about it. If you had not identified an issue, or the person that you brought it to had not identified the issue, then we might have been dealing with how to solve it instead of how to prevent it.
Oh yeah, the lease, the parking, the ordinance would have killed the deal, but we would have already been under contract. Yeah. So yeah, it's important to know, and the importance of advocacy and having your point on everything that's going on from a state and local level. So what was your deal? I know you've had some doozies.
Yeah. What I find is, that's what the ones that teach you the most, right? You learn the most out of those. And I sold a piece of land on Okeechobee Road. They had a structure in it, and it was basically a family had owned it for like 20 years, and unfortunately, the husband had passed away. She had inherited the property, and she had always worked with her husband in maintaining and managing the property. They had run a business out of there, and now they were leasing it out for different uses. Well, it just so happens that years before, the state came down, because they're right on Okeechobee Road and it's owned by the state of Florida. And that's another really interesting thing that happens. I never really understood that concept until I got into commercial real estate. The fact that some roads are owned by your local municipality, some are state roads, and some of those things get very complex. Well, they wanted to make a right turn right on 29th and Okeechobee Road. So they wanted to take a piece of the corner of their property. But the rules of the state say that they had to do an environmental study on that land before they were able to take that corner, so that it could be a swift and an easier right of way to be able to turn to the right-hand side. Of course, the issue was that it came back that there were some environmental issues on the property. And those environmental issues, the good news is that the property was going to be able to be put into was put into a state program that would alleviate those problems. They would remediate whatever environmental issues there were. And that was part of them getting the right of way to be able to make that corner and all that stuff. But for 10 years, that thing kind of stayed dormant. It got lost somewhere in the process. And when I was listing the property, I had to inform both the buyer and the seller, of course, that this is an issue that we would have to resolve. We got an offer right away. It was a very good offer, and the buyer was willing to wait until those items were resolved. But then, we found out that the items became very, very complex, because basically there was work that they needed to be doing for 10 years that did not get done. And now it was getting picked back up. So now they have to do new boring studies, in which, if you don't know what that is, but basically they have to drill into the actual dirt. They have to pull that out. They have to study it. They have to come back, a few months later, do it again, and then they got to measure those two things. So you could imagine, if you're trying to close a transaction, those things get complex. And then I'm dealing with multiple agencies. I'm dealing with an engineering firm out of Orlando that is working with the Florida Department of Energy Protection. Or environmental protection. And so I remember I was going to, I'm trying to handle everything by phone and communication by email. I'm trying to push this through. And we were going to, our annual August, Florida Realtors Conference. So I decided to buy a bunch of empanadas from Graciano's. I'm going to become famous for buying people empanadas from Graciano's. I drove up, and the first day of the conference, drove up, I dropped my bags down, and I went straight to their offices, and I sat there for an hour, and for them to explain to me what was the entire process. And it was extremely lengthy. And, suffice it to say, it took months of work. And part of it was that, that program was allocated by a certain amount of money, right? You know how government agencies work. And at some point, the program then was under was overseen by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. In the middle of my transaction, they transferred it to Durham. So now it's a new project manager working with the same engineering firm, thank God, because at least they had the historical, aspects. And, and then at some point we had to go to the buyer and say, like, we got to figure something out, because you want to do something. She wants to sell you the property, but you got this in between. But we found out that there was a way for him to develop it, because it's Celia Hialeah, to develop the property without having that completely remediated. And so the buyer got an environmental attorney involved, and, we all went down to the city. And the great thing about the city of Hialeah is that if you get there, you could get there early anytime, and you want to see somebody in zoning and planning, and you will get seen. You might have to wait a while, but you will be able to see somebody there at that time. And I learned so many things. There was, for example, there was some, the test had resulted that there was some of that environmental issues, which, by the way, we're not great in size or very very problematic from an environmental perspective, but they were seeping into Okeechobee Road, right? And so now the question is, okay, what are we remediating, right? Because you're not going to build in Okeechobee Road. So I called the Florida Department of Transportation. I found that they have a memorandum of understanding with all of their municipalities, that if there is an environmental issue that goes into it, that it's okay for them with them, because that road will never be anything other than the road. And so that gives you a little bit of leeway. So like little things like that you learn in a transaction, that to me is, I'm a nerd by nature. I love all of those little details that you learn in a transaction. But most importantly, it's, the fact that I was able to help this lady that had just lost her husband a year before, was in the middle of something very complex, was trying to take care of her two grown daughters and her, teenage, grandkids, was trying to figure out the things that her husband would usually take care of. Right. And so navigating through that and being able to be a guide, especially with something this complex, was incredibly rewarding. And every year I get a Christmas card from her. We talk about 2-3 times a year, and she's doing great. Her grandkids are doing phenomenal, and she was able to make it happen. But that is the great thing for me, is that those are lessons that I'll never forget.
Right.
And so
and you actually opened up. So a lot of, it seems like some of these ordinance or laws or whatever we want, the whole government machine or the environmental machine or whatever it is, zoning, a lot of things get passed and then people forget, like, why was it passed, or what was the process, or what is so if somebody had just said, oh, well, you don't need to worry about that because this road is always going to be a road. Well, hello, that would have saved so much time. But look at the hoops you had to go through and the people you had to hire, because somebody in the department that should have known that it wasn't an issue made it an issue, right? So I think that's what's super frustrating, very frustrating, hearing that story, because the reality is it made a process that could have been a lot faster and efficient, pretty inefficient and convoluted, and added additional stress to both parties without the need to, if somebody had just known.
And it's interesting because both you and I are involved in the advocacy side of things. We do a lot. We're a couple of weeks away from going to Greater American Realtor Days, and advocating for all the things that are important to us and our clients and our communities in Tallahassee. But one of the things that I find is that there are a lot of rules that are enacted that sometimes have unintended consequences.
Right.
But we're all human beings, right? So there's so much that you are trying to anticipate what is going to be the flip side of enacting a new guideline, new rules. What's frustrating is that there is not a quick fix. There is not at least a quick realization that, I think we need to amend this, or we need to change this. Like, you have to go in front of people, convince them of what is the pain that is being caused by this rule, and that entire of course, when you're in the middle of the transaction, you're focused on, okay, how do I get to here, because I'm not going to be able to change the world,
how do I get it closed?
How do I get it closed? Because that's ultimately what your client is looking for.
Right.
Your client, I don't know if you feel this way, but I always feel like they're looking for expertise, but more importantly, they're looking for you to have the resources to be able to address those issues. More importantly, to anticipate those issues, and that's where experience comes from.
Yeah, but some things can't be anticipated. Like if you now, you'll be able to anticipate that, and you'll also know the answer, right? Because you'll be like, no, this road doesn't require it, because this road's always going to be a road. But how could you have anticipated that until you saw it, right? Until you came across it.
For sure. No, and I remember, of course, if you own real estate in South Florida, in Miami, you're going to deal with termites, right? Any time that I've seen a termite inspector do an inspection, they always tell them, you either had termite, you either had termite, right? This is the saying. You either had termites, you have it or you will have it, right? That's just part of it.
Right.
But I remember that in we were closing on a property in around Midtown, Morningside, and the inspection comes back and they had African beetles. Have you heard about this thing?
African beetles, and I've heard of African bees, but not African beetles.
These African beetles that are also burrow in the wood, and it's like termites to another level.
Mm-hmm.
And like, in order to address the issue, you need 3 times the amount of poisonous gas that they put in there. But more importantly, they really destroy, and it was destroying the truss of a house whose roof was replaced a year before.
Oh, wow. So somebody missed
so
the
it was like,
you
know, so here's Fernando, right, at 11 o'clock at night, at home in his computer,
Googling
African beetles, wood destroying African beetles. So, you know.
You are a nerd.
That's just I don't deny it. I wear it proudly. So, you know, I'm hoping that through the course of the podcast, we're able to share a few more stories. There are always stories of victory, I think, at the end of the day, because you're always pushing through. We always find a way. And I think that is, you know, a great lesson in all of it as well. So tell me this week, did you come across anything interesting, anything you learned?
Oh my gosh, you're going to put me on the spot again. So I'm still trying to track down my $6 million number.
Oh, yeah?
For Coral Gables. Remember I told you, but I don't have it yet.
Well,
so it's something interesting that I learned. So I listened to a great webinar put on by ULI.
Okay.
The Urban Land Institute. And it was super interesting because it talked about they interviewed 3 people whose shopping centers or community centers had won the awards last year. And some of the takeaways that I got, 3 of the takeaways was that all 3 of them, their first goal, even though they said, yes, we're in the business of commerce and making money, but for all 3 of them, their first goal was creating community with their space. So one of them was an old series of Dr. Pepper bottling plants, and I'll think of the name. And they tied, and they've been collecting, this one group has been collecting these or buying these warehouses since the 80s. So it's a little bit like the idea behind Wynwood. But then they started transforming each individual one and then connecting them with pathways and open spaces to bring connectivity. But all 3, I'll get into some of the other ones in another episode, maybe, or on my blog or somewhere. The other thing that was super important was that all 3 of them talked about the importance of being able to be reached by something other than the automobile. So all 3 of them were next to trails. And what I would love to do on one of our podcasts is talk about how Miami is creating all these trails and what that means. You know, we've got the Underline, we've got the Everglades to Biscayne Bay Trail, and then we've got the, the Tamiami Ludlam Trail. So I thought that was super interesting. So that was one that kind of the light bulb went off in terms of something I learned.
People often don't recognize how important that is, the walkability, the bike trails, you know, the parks and all those elements, because it is about community. I told you the story about I was helping a developer buy a unit in North Beach, and both him and his wife love to go on long bike rides. So he was asking me if he could connect all the way from South Beach to North Beach. Which he was able to do, and just basically ride up and down the coast, which is you know, and that was a big selling point for him, you know, because he didn't want to be in necessarily the hustle and bustle of South Beach, but he wanted to have that connectivity and be able to walk, to drive, you know, to ride down there whenever they wanted to do it.
Yeah, super cool. And I'm excited. I think I can't wait for the Underline. We've already seen a big section done in downtown and the Brickell area. And now they're doing the one off US 1 up to UM. I think it's going to be super, super exciting. And it's just going to transform that whole corridor. What about you? What did you learn?
I I came across an article about Miami being ranked 11th in the nation for the number of co-working spaces that are available. And at first I thought, well, if you really think about it, the office market here has been much more robust than other places, after COVID. If you really think about it, there was, at least anecdotally, there are a lot of companies that have expanded. And of course, part of it is the huge migration of companies and individuals that we have had to Miami. But what I really like about that stat is that if you really think about it, I think there's a stat that says that Miami is number 2 in the nation in entrepreneurship. And it is true. We do have a spirit of entrepreneurship in our city. And there's a lot of people opening businesses. And I think that the co-working spaces are a great gateway to that, because it gives them an opportunity to have that formal setting at an affordable price, usually very centrally located, where they can start off. So in essence, these co-working spaces become like, the garages of old.
Right.
We don't have a lot of garages in Miami, if you really think about it. Yeah. So this becomes like the garages of old. So I thought that was a really interesting, little stat.
That is a good stat. And I had a client who was looking for office space, and they were seriously, it's a company from Singapore that was coming over here, a tech company. Okay. And they were going to rent like 5,000 square feet. They were looking, but they weren't sure of their concept. And so at the end, they ended up getting one of these temporary spaces just to kind of test the market, see if the people that they have up in Broward would come down here for office space, because they felt like Miami was where they needed to be, but they had a satellite office in Broward. So to your point, not just entrepreneurs, but also just testing which market, especially now with people not going into the office, is there a space or a neighborhood where I can entice them to come down to work, back to the office? Sure. So great.
Well, listen, we got another one in the book. But if we were doing this old school, it would be like another one in the can, but there's no more can. It's just in the digital verse. It's another one in the digital verse. Oh. There you go. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you to our fact checker.